Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session on best practices for securing banking data with zero trust segmentation. And my name is Steve Winterfeld. I'm the advisory CISO here at Akamai, and I'll be hosting this conversation with Terry and Jason. Terry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So Terry Hashley, been with Citrix about 3 years now, just over 3 years, and I got just about 20 years in the field.
Okay. Jason Aguiar, I coming over from the recent acquisition of Guardicore. My role is as a sales engineer focused on our financial service vertical.
And so today we're going to talk about, how to do internal segmentation in a VDI environment. I know when I talk about internal segmentation, Jason's probably going to go have some PTSD, but the reality is, it's becoming more and more the norm. And so as we think through things like zero trust and we reference NIST 800-207, it talks about microsegmentation. And we're going to talk about some of the current and most dynamic ways to do that, some of the benefits, some of the challenges, and we're going to wrap those all up with some real world examples. So as we jump in here, I guess one of the first things I want to understand is, as organizations continue to move to cloud environments, and if they have this goal of moving into zero trust to protect their brand, to protect their employee base, what are some of the key lessons around financial service organizations that you've learned? Terry, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, one of the big things that financial services organizations and really organizations as a whole, it's this transformation. It's reorganizing, realizing what IT can do, and giving themselves a new shot. Making better practices. There's a hesitance because there's a lot of these teams that are adopting going into cloud organizations or cloud, I shouldn't say cloud organizations, but going into the cloud per se.
I shouldn't say cloud
A lot of
organizations,
these
but going into
teams
the
are
cloud per se. A
traditional.
lot of
They
these
don't have the
teams
new
are
mindsets. They see this big
traditional.
new
They don't
thing that
have
they
the
can
new
do, and
mindsets. They see
so
this
they
big
start looking at
new thing that they can do, and
capabilities and
so they
trying to
start looking at
understand how they can best
capabilities
realize
and
value out of
trying
those
to
capabilities.
understand
So
how they can
we
best
start bringing
realize
in
value
VDI
out of
into the
those
mix
capabilities.
and
So
saying, okay, well, let's
we
look
start
at
bringing in
hosting VDI
VDI
in a
into the
cloud
mix and saying,
organization.
okay, well, let's look at
Let's
hosting
look at
VDI in a cloud
hosting
organization.
workloads inside of
Let's look
clouds,
at
things like that. Well, how do
hosting
we protect those workloads?
workloads
How do we
inside
make
of
sure that
clouds,
everything
things like that.
is
How do
truly
we
safe?
protect those workloads? How do we
And
make
that's
sure that
where we
everything
start looking
is
at
truly safe?
microsegmentation.
And that's
VDI
where
natively
we
allows
start looking
that
at
within
microsegmentation.
it because you can start
VDI natively
placing
allows
your
that
containers or
within
barriers,
it
but
because you can start
Guardicore and
placing your
Citrix paired
containers or
together
barriers,
give you
but
even greater
Guardicore
controls around
and
that, which
Citrix
Jason can
paired
touch on
together
pretty
give you
heavily.
even greater controls around that, which
Yeah,
Jason
yeah,
can touch
and
on
what's
pretty
nice
heavily.
about it is, as we look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
some of the
and
lessons
what's nice
learned,
about it is, as we
they
look
think about
at
it from an
some of the
overwhelming
lessons
perspective
learned,
of they're trying to boil the
they
ocean,
think
and
about it
really
from an
it
overwhelming
starts with
perspective of
visibility
they're trying to
and
boil the ocean,
understanding
and
what
really
these
it starts
workloads
with
are doing, these
visibility and
VDIs are doing,
understanding what
getting
these
that
workloads
visibility
are doing, these
between those
VDIs
VDIs
are
where you don't
doing,
traditionally
getting
have a
that
choke point
visibility
or a
between those
network
VDIs
device
where
to
you don't
get that
traditionally have
visibility,
a choke point
getting
or
strong
a network
contextual
device to get that visibility.
awareness as to what the
Getting strong
processes are,
contextual
what the user identity
awareness as
is.
to what
And
the
so
processes are,
for the
what the
financial
user
customers that I'm
identity
working
is.
with,
And
it starts
so
with that
for
journey
the
of
financial customers that I'm
visibility,
working with,
taking a
it
look at what
starts
their
with that
current
journey
programs
of
dictate or
visibility,
allow, is not
taking a
allowed,
look at what their
and then
current
moving
programs
into
dictate or
more
allow is not
of
allowed,
a
and
reduction in
then
an
moving
attack
into
surface
more
by applying
of
some
a
enforcement points
reduction in an
at those
attack
workloads.
surface by applying some enforcement
Yeah, I
points
will
at
tell
those
you that
workloads.
as someone who's thinking
Yeah,
about
I will
this
tell you
as a
that as
CISO,
someone who's
I
thinking
really
about
like the idea
this
of
as a
visibility
CISO,
that's at the data
I
flow
really like
level,
the
but
idea of
not buried
visibility
inside
that's
logs. That
at
I
the
really
data
can
flow
see a
level,
map of
but
where
not
the data is
buried
going.
inside logs.
I can see
I
data
really can
flowing
see a map of where
outside,
the data
to
is
the
going.
internet. I can
I can
ask
see
quick
data
questions on
flowing
that,
outside,
do
to the
historical
internet. I can ask quick questions
investigations.
on
So
that, do
I'm really
historical
excited about that.
investigation.
Holy
So
grail for me, which is that
I'm really
visibility.
excited about that
But
holy
another thing
grail
I
for
keep
me, which
hearing as
is
I
that
talk to my
visibility.
peers, about some of
But
the big
another thing I
challenges
keep
they're
hearing as
facing
I
right
talk to my
now.
peers,
And really,
about some of the
I
big
hear two
challenges they're
things
facing right
consistently.
now.
One is around compliance. We've got things like I've got PCI information, or I have public health information, or I've got, data privacy issues, and I need to categorize and have, you know, basically areas of compliance within my data environment. And the other one is transformation. You know, we talked about going to cloud, but having multi environments, and as we go into this transformation, how can we integrate security into this? So we'll start off with you, Jason.
Yeah. So again, kind of leading from the last topic, the visibility is really helping drive these different projects, whether it is compliance or it is transformation. And so when we look at what visibility is giving them of what's communicating, I'm thinking about PCI. You know, do parts of my environments need access to that data? Should my PCI environment be leaving and talking to other areas of my environment? Those are simple solutions that you can drive with a software-defined segmentation tool like Guardicore. And it's simple to put policy around those things that you're starting to divvy up and divide. Now, when we look at transformation and cloud transformation, again, it comes down to where's our resources. Today, we have all of these silos, whether they're bare metals or they're VDIs, and they're, you know, public cloud, private cloud, multiple cloud, all of these things. And so you do want a true single pane of glass across all of them. And with kind of the journey of, do I want to take this from an on-prem data center and move this to the cloud? What is that going to look like? Can it help me do modernization of those applications? How does that map back to my users? How does that map back to the VDIs that they're using, or the desktops, or the laptops that they're using to get into these applications? And then once we migrate it, we've determined if it's a lift and shift or a modernization. What happens about afterwards? What else can we do there? And now we can start working with those workloads, building trends and patterns around, hey, are they configured properly? Are we spending money on throughput because we have connections to other locations? And so all of these are just, you know, typical challenges that they face, but they can be easily broken down into smaller segments and then dialed in, right, at their own pace. They don't have to jump from day 1 to day 30. They can slowly dial that in.
Yeah, and dialing it in and getting that holistic view, it's a great capability, it's a great opportunity, and it's something I hear customers. The security team, they rely so heavily on a SIM tool, right? They rely on correlating events and building all this data and being able to action on all this data. And one of the challenges with that is there's no one size fits all approach, right? They come in and they have a tool that they build all these in with. When we start looking at a cloud transformation journey, we have all this build up data. We have these policies that have been built organically over time. We bring in the cloud. We start looking at modernized approaches. You know, like you said, they look at boiling the ocean from the start. Well, sometimes the boil of the ocean is also that reset. This is the true time to be able to reset. And what Citrix brings to the table is we're able to turn around and say, you can build your segmentation, your physical segmentation, and putting different boundaries up if you want to. But by building in, taking golden images and things like that, the beauty of Guardicore and Citrix together, it's you install the agent inside of a golden image and you let it deploy out. It builds out with your size. It builds out with your user base. So move the workload to the cloud, make it a bursting capability, make it a DR capability, or do that boil the ocean approach and just say, hey, we're going to make a knife switch. We want to go cloud with this. Most don't do that, but it can happen, right? And put the Guardicore agent inside the image, let it build itself using your cloud native technologies with machine creation services or provisioning services that we have natively today that you're used to using. You don't have to use this brand new technology, and say, okay, we have the agent, we have the visibility. Now, as users are logging into these environments, those policies are applying. There's some templating that Guardicore brings to the table for everybody. So you can say, here's some best practice views for some basic things. And just like you did with your SIM tool through the ages of having it, you can continue to build that modernized story with what Guardicore brings to the table with the microsegmentation as well. And that's where we see a lot of benefit, where we go hand in hand, where we start marrying delivering applications, delivering desktops, and answering the question of security. We don't have to put the allow everything rule, right? Citrix Cloud brings into the table where we're saying we understand network teams and firewall teams. They don't want to poke every hole known to man inside the firewall. So let's not do that. We've strapped it down to port 443 outbound for the majority of our traffic. Now there's some gaining visibility. Let's add on to that. Let's get the user workflows. We fixed Northwest to a degree, right? There's always everything can get better from the security space, but let's focus on east-west now. North-south. We're good. Let's look at east-west. Let's make sure everything's happening across the plane, especially now that a lot of these organizations aren't looking at doing a point-to-site VPN. They don't want to do a site-to-site VPN because there's no SLA around that. They're looking at really making these cloud environments part of their network. It's part of their MPLS. It's in their BGP routing table. It's built into this platform as a whole. So let's secure it. Let's gain visibility. Let's be able to put contextual controls, ring fence an application, and really help build the visibility story. And I think with, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jason, but you have an auditor come in or somebody who wants to come in and say, let's look at the NIST compliance regulations, or let's look at the FFIEC. How can we show that we're complying with it? Here's your dashboard. Let's go look at the Guardicore dashboard, and from a networking perspective, here's everything you need to see there, and then here are the 5 or 10 or however many images we needed from a golden image perspective. This is what we're deploying. This is what we have installed. Much more narrow scoped approach to being able, or what we have to discuss with an auditor to make sure we're also compliant.
Yeah, so that's exactly it, right? That's part of the flexibility that Guardicore can bring, and it's targeting our labels and the way that we do labels, the way that companies have the ability to generate their own labels to drive not only visualization inside of their maps, but then also use those labels from an enforcement perspective, right? We're not doing host name and IP addresses anymore. We want customers to have the ability to scale, to have their automation teams build logic into the way rules are generated. And so one of the things I like to do when I speak to customers is I'm looking at the same data, the same single pane of glass, but I have a different lens, and my labels are those lenses. And so if I want to be a compliance admin or a compliance officer, and I want to see the same production app and how VDIs are accessing it, or how virtual apps are accessing it, I still want the same awareness. What users are doing it, what processes, right? What command lines may potentially go with that sort of interaction. And then if I want to take that hat off and I want to be an infrastructure, admin, I want to see the same content and the same data, and I should easily be able to switch between all of those different things. Now, what's nice about it is it's not tabular, it's not a traditional log. We're getting maps, and we react as humans differently to those visual cues. And it's nice when we can have a map up on a wall, whether it's your internal SOC or just an admin looking at a consistent screen, and to see that, hey, look, this map vaguely or drastically looks different than yesterday's map, and I can dig into those things. And so those visual cues help, and something you can't really get from just reading logs per se. You actually see those connections, and then you can just, again, linear labels. They have no dependency on each other. How you want to group them gives you that flexibility.
And while you kind of pushed me into PTSD when you said auditors, I will also tell you, the thing I love about that visibility is exactly what he said. You can show somebody a human readable map of what the environment is. And in a 0 day, you can look for protocols, say log4j. In an investigation around ransomware, you can go look historically of who talked to who. So all of these are I know what's in PCI. I know what the visualization is. I can integrate it into Citrix seamlessly. All of this makes me happy. So Jason, the next question I think is kind of for you again. Previously when I was on the bank side, I really had problems. I had third parties that have access through Citrix to my environment. And one of the things that I was always worried about is, you know, those controls and how I was going to be able to monitor them. Kind of walk me through how that works and what the value is when, you have a call center or something in another country and managing it through this kind of an environment.
Yeah, yeah. So it goes back to kind of having those labels to help define those resources, those source resources, the destination resources, and we take that, and that's part of policy, right? And so we're starting to build something that's a little bit more restrictive, and we're dialing it in. So we start there. The next thing is, well, what is it that they want to access? Right? What are they going to use on their source machines, and what are they going to need to get to on the destination? Is it just something as simple as Chrome, or do we need to get into Putty? Do we need to get into some other processes, some other applications? And so now I have the ability to start defining those source and destination processes. And so that's great because it's a little bit more rigid. But now I'm thinking about, hey, I've got VDIs, and so those could be shared resources in some cases. I've got first shift, second shift, third shift. And so they may be using the same VDIs. May be using the same resources. How do I differentiate? The core processes or the core policies that we just talked about are needed, but now I'm going to take their identity and include that as part of the policy for enforcement. And so now we're getting into something that's it's very rigid, but it's very targeted to your third party access. And let's just say you take it a little bit further and you're thinking, do I really want to give these particular, users or groups access to a VDI? Can I make this a little bit simpler? I've got it set up for a specific set of departments that I want to have VDIs to access my core apps. But now I've got maybe another group that's coming in and I don't want to have to provision VDIs for them. Could I use that in virtual apps? And the answer is simply yes. And Terry can touch on it. But it's as simple as, flipping a switch and then installing kind of our agent on those servers to give you that capability. And again, it's a rinse and repeat from deploying policies to managing that and getting that visualization.
Yeah, to what Jason was saying, the agent lets you it ties the identity to the user. So when you have these app published environments where they're not traditional or typical single user VDI sessions, you still get controls. It's not, oh, we have a server that the first person who logged in, that's the policy every subsequent user gets on that machine that's publishing those applications. Yes, it might be publishing Word and only Microsoft Word. That's great, that's fine, but we are still giving granular controls where we're saying Jason has this identity profile and this access to the network, whereas Terry logs in and he gets this level of granular access. And it helps build the story even further. So Citrix, we're built around the idea of mergers, acquisitions, contractor use cases, things like that coming into our environment. So we expand on that with Citrix Cloud with adaptive authentication and our traditional ADC stories where we bring in endpoint analysis and device posture checking capabilities, things like that. So those BYOD devices or the acquisition that's coming in, that's you don't want to refresh all their devices on day one, we build that story around initial access, and then Guardicore really expands on that even further to say the workloads that they're accessing, we've made sure the device is safe, and if it wasn't safe, we've stripped down some access, or we've just gone ahead and given them a sandbox, an environment where they log in and then double hop into this use case. That's great, but let's still build out even further security, and that's where this comes into play, where we drop the agent, we put it right on the workload servers themselves, the VDA servers, and we have all that visibility that we need. We have all the policies that we need moving forward.
So we talked about third party, we talked about M&A. Jason, are there other use cases that you're running into a lot within financial services?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously we touched on compliance as well, but I think the other big one is focused on ransomware and zero-day threats. There's often the phone calls that go out of, hey, I've got these CVEs and they're mission critical to me. How are you going to adapt to it? And that's kind of what you would expect from a modern day, software defined segmentation. having the ability to adapt to these controls and these vulnerabilities that are out there. And so what we have the ability to do there is query these machines and look at specific, files, registry values, installed versions, all of these things to look for these, vulnerabilities. Think about SolarWinds. Think about Log4j. Think about the recent stuff that's going on with CVEs around Apache, right? You have to identify these versions, identify which machines are vulnerable, look at, some of the key indicators of compromise for those. But then once you've identified them, take those same labels of how you found them, apply them to your environment. Now you can visualize. This vulnerability has been out there for the past 2 weeks. I want to look at the last month worth of data. I want to see everywhere that those vulnerabilities could have been exploited. And then from that, build policies around it. You don't want something to talk to the internet like SolarWinds or Log4j, you can block it from those resources out. Continue to allow it to work within your environment without having to shun an application off the network, right? No more breaking the application just because you need to remediate and patch. And then when they are remediated, have that dynamic label be removed so they're no longer restricted. Allow them to access the apps that they need again. That's huge. You no longer have to intervene. There's no longer somebody there plugging in cables or bringing something back up online. And so there's a lot of flexibility with that. And then the last piece of that too is, well, what happens to those VMs or those virtual machines that are sitting somewhere that have been turned off that have that code? Or that install file that some junior admin is going to look at and say, hey, I've got a little sandbox I can play. And then all of a sudden installs it. And now that vulnerability is back. Something we can continually evaluate in your environment as we see it, notify, dynamically apply those policies, and dynamically respond to it.
Awesome. So I see we have a question that's come in here. Please, if you have any other questions, if we don't get them through our natural discussion, we'll answer those questions at the very end. But anybody else that has questions, please go ahead and send them in. Terry, I think I'll pick on you for this one. Is we've talked a lot about conceptual things, while why it's better to go with agent-based versus internal firewalls, why it's time to move to internal segmentation, some great use cases, but how do I actually now turn around and implement this? If I'm like, I like this idea, I want to execute it, walk me through how we do that.
Yeah, especially for this story here. We are looking at a technology where it's agent-based, and Citrix relies heavily on image-based rollouts, especially for very large environments. When you have 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 plus machines that you're pushing out to your environment, and you have an image for your different branch offices, different major offices where you have call centers, things like that, it becomes much easier to roll this out. It doesn't have to be a massive deployment effort. It turns into the traditional story of I'm running an update for my image because I had Windows updates and I had a couple applications that needed an update. Oh, and by the way, we're implementing Guardicore in our environment. So let's go install that agent inside your image. You probably have a dev, a cert, a prod environment. This is financial services. Nobody goes right to prod. So we drop it into the dev environment. We get that agent inside the image. We let those dev users see this catalog item inside their Citrix workspace, launch into the environment, test it, make sure their applications are working. That's just going to feed the animal that is Guardicore. It's going to give those guys these guys, I should say, all of the data that they've been looking for. It's going to start building that data profile. Oh, they launched these applications in dev. Here's where some of the traffic flows are going. That's where it is. That's the rollout method. That's how we get started with these technologies, and it's no different than what they're doing today. Let's push it to the image. Let's get that image rolled out. Let's do the update of the catalogs, and then let's let it flow. If we have issues, I don't really foresee any issues with this type of thing, having seen these rollouts happen already. But it's the traditional rollback story. So you still have that back and forward flow that's very easy to do. So it's something you shouldn't be scared about testing. You should be able to just jump in both feet, get it into dev, make sure everything's working, run it through cert for testing, make sure everything's certified based on each business unit, and then get into prod. And it should be a very natural flow of doing that work.
And the other nice thing too to think about is, and this is often a concern, is so I've installed the agent, now I've got to move everything right to Guardicore in that sense, and that's not true. And so we get the visibility, right? We're not doing any reboots for anything. It's a part of the image build, and that's great. All of your existing control points and enforcement points, whether it's IP tables or Windows firewall or network devices, those still all exist. We're not interfering with those things. We want them to continue to work. So your business is going to continue to work, but you may find that needle in the haystack that, hey, here's an anomaly and I need to block this one little thing, right? Whatever this vulnerability is or whatever this finding is. So you're taking that visibility information and say, I just want to put this one rule into Guardicore. When we're ready in a phased approach, we can start that migration. We could start building rules. We could start addressing the larger use cases, the user identity, third-party access to apps. All of that can happen at your own speed. Again, going back to the dial, you're going to tweak the dial when you're ready. You can take this on at your own pace. You can get as rigid as you need to be because of an event or because of an audit finding, or you can get there because that's a part of your zero trust journey, right? And so those are just different ways that you can address it. What we need to understand is that just because we're putting the agent there doesn't mean that we need to change the way that we do business today. The visibility helps you move forward to address your projects and then to also address the findings that you're seeing from the visibility.
Yeah, and it's a when you put this on, it's in review mode essentially, right? I mean, we're not doing policy enforcement and applying templates day zero. I mean, right? That's not where we're going right off the bat.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and that's it, right? We're not doing the enforcement. We're in learning mode. And the learning mode is simply the flows as they happen, all ingress and ingress of particular apps. Now, for some customers, there's that need. There's that immediate pain of, I've got this, I've got to stop this. And so they can move to that. Other customers are looking at their governance that they have. They have all these policies for the data center, things that they allow and things they don't. Think about that. Now you can all of a sudden put that into an actual enforcement policy that's being enforced on those workloads wherever they live. And you have the ability to just reduce your overall attack surface by taking your governance and actually making that a policy on a workload.
Perfect. We did have a couple questions come in. We're almost at time, so let's give quick answers to these. The first is, we are a Citrix shop. Does moving to this model mean we need to blow up what we have and rebuild everything? Jason, I'll throw this one over to you.
Yeah. So no, as we were just kind of talking about, we don't have to blow up any model, right? We can be deployed as you want. There's no dependencies on infrastructure to exist. It's about the workload. And so as that workload spins up in the VDI, whether it's persistent, non-persistent, or you want to look at virtual apps, all of those things, again, starts with the agent rollout, visibility, and then you can start consuming policy to distribute your enforcement points.
And the next one, Barry, I'll give you the next one is, how do smaller companies without a dedicated cyber team do something like this?
It's nice. I mean, especially if you're already a company using Citrix today, a lot of your stuff is already rolled out. It's not another team and another build and another major piece that you have to think about as being this brand new ecosystem to support versus an application that's enabling some controls. With Citrix already there, it's just updating the image. If you don't have Citrix there today, using our Citrix Cloud product, we have all of this stuff built out for you, and it's simply saying, put some connector servers in your data center or in your public cloud location, and boom, you're connected. It's that simple. I mean, the setup time is within 30 minutes. Most of the time, your team, the sales team that works with you, helps you through that process so you understand it, and then install the Guardicore image on the first workloads. So you get the visibility right up front, and you're deploying out into the environment and just able to move forward with pretty much at speed without having to really slow down.
I want to first of all thank everybody for joining us today. It's been a great session. I really want to emphasize on this. You know, we want this to be practical, and so if you have any questions of us on how this works, want some follow up, please reach out to any of us. You can grab us on LinkedIn, where you can come to our companies directly. If you have Citrix or if you have Akamai today, reach out to your reps and they'll get a hold of us. But we're happy to continue this conversation and delve in to any specifics you have. Also, I want everybody to remember to check emails after this to see if you got that dot, because we want to make sure that we get it to you if you want. So again, thank you very much for your time.